camps and the container camps for the people who've come from Syria and from Iraq. It's distressing to meet families who've been there for 3.5 years, and with not much prospect we can see right now of any early return to Syria. But I am impressed by the standard of what the Turkish government has put in place, standard of accommodation and services, and they've done it largely without international support and funding. But this is a big burden. We're talking some 2 million people who have come into Turkey and have been here a while and will be here quite a while. So this crisis isn't going away anytime soon. I hope that UNDP will get traction with our donors and partners for doing more to support the local municipalities and communities. And when the Turkish authorities get all the rules around the people from Syria and Iraq being able to work legally, to be part of creating more jobs in the communities, both for the locals and for the people who come fleeing violence.
كنت أدرس أورتمان معلمة يعني كي سنة الحرب جيت لهون قطر بركت يعني بعدين بنتي صغيرة بعدين قلت بس تكبر بدي أرجع كمان أتوظف وأتعلم تركي يعني تركي يعني حتى بعدين أرجع كمان إني أورتمان أصير.
It's distressing to meet families who've been there for 3.5 years, and with not much prospect we can see right now of any early return to Syria.
Yabancı işçi çalıştırma mevzuatının gelmesi istihdama Suriyelilerin de katılmasına imkan sağladı. Fakat en büyük problemlerden biri Suriyelilerin dil problemi.
I am impressed by the standard of what the Turkish government has put in place. This is a big burden. We're talking some 2 million people who have come into Turkey and have been here a while and will be here quite a while.
Gaziantep'te her gün 1500 ton civarında bir çöp oluşuyor. Burada insan sayısının artmasıyla günlük olarak 350 ton daha fazla çöp gelmeye başladı. Yer sıkıntısı yaşamaya başladık. İşletme koşulları zorlaştı.
Normalde 12'de işimiz biterken süreler geldi gelmedi, yani 2-2.30'a kadar bir çalışıyoruz.
This crisis isn't going away anytime soon. I hope that UNDP will get traction, doing more to support the local municipalities, to be part of creating more jobs, both for the locals and for the people who come fleeing violence.
Right now, countries around our world are striving to help their citizens enjoy safe, empowered lives. Trillions of dollars and years of hard work have been spent trying to eradicate poverty and ensure a bright, sustainable future for all. But while progress is being made, many of the poorest countries have seen their gains erased by disasters. Sustainable development can only happen if we reduce these risks. To provide universal education, we need schools that can withstand earthquakes. To achieve zero hunger, we need to protect crops from drought. And to eradicate poverty, we must ensure that jobs and livelihoods can endure disaster. Development must be smart, with every decision based on an understanding of risk, and every effort made to prevent, mitigate, and prepare for disasters. By being risk-informed, we will save money, resources, and most importantly, lives. But while it can be simple to build one house or one bridge safely, how do we make sure all the houses and all the bridges are safe? This takes laws, policies, and an all-of-society approach, including engaging with civil society and the private sector. At UNDP, we support countries as they pass these laws, develop these institutions, and carry out the work behind the scenes. This helps turn this into this. Since 2005, we've invested nearly $2 billion helping our partners reduce the risk of disasters, helping at least 150 countries strengthen resilience and protect people and communities. And in 2015, we're working to expand our work even further, targeting dozens of countries with increased technical support. Together, we hope to transform how development is done. Because when it comes to development, if it isn't risk-informed, it isn't sustainable. UNDP, supporting risk-informed, sustainable development.
Günaydın, everybody. Good morning. It's good to see you all back here. Hope you slept well last night. Welcome to day 2 of this year's Istanbul Development Dialogue. I think we all agree that we had some great and stimulating discussions yesterday. Today we're going to mix it up a little bit in terms of the format, but I'm going to let Ben explain more about this. But just a couple of reminders before we kick off day 2. Please do keep your questions coming in. We'd love to hear from you. Hashtag IDD 2017, that's our address. We had some questions yesterday. We'll continue to ask questions to our panelists today as well. And if you haven't had a chance, please do check out the screening room upstairs, the Idea Room. Some great short documentaries as well as film screenings that will be happening throughout the day. So if you haven't had a chance to check it out, please do so before the end of the day. Like I said, today we're going to mix it up a little bit in terms of our format. Ben Slay is actually going to give us an overview of what we can expect today. So, Ben?
Well, good morning, everyone. Günaydın. We indeed have a big program for today, our second day. Let me just briefly give an overview of some of the logistics of how this is going to work. After this, of course, we'll have our keynote of today delivered by UNDP Strategic Policy Director Pedro Conceicao, and then we'll move from there into the Partners Forum. Now, we've done the work to look at who has signed up for which corners when you did the registration, and it seems like there's a good balance across the 3 thematic corners or breakout sessions. That is to say, thank you very much. So that is to say the number of people who've signed up for the governance, migration, and conflict and risks corner thematic breakout session is roughly the same number as those who signed up for the socioeconomic risk session, breakout session, and the climate and disaster risk session. So what this means is you all got your first choices. So life is beautiful. So whatever your first choice was, that's where you'll go for the corners that will meet, I should say, in the afternoon. And you can see where those meetings will be. The ballroom for governance, that's here, and then upstairs in the Asia and Europe rooms for the other 2. Now, I should say before we get to that, we'll have the Partners Forum. And this is the place where the logic of the dialogues is once again accentuated, where our partner organizations can come up. Essentially, you have an open mic to describe what it is your organization is doing in risk and resilience. But please do so, once again, for no longer than 5 to 8 minutes. If you have PowerPoint slides, please no more than 2 slides, so that we can have time for questions, answers, and discussions, and indeed a dialogue around the UNDP partners' presentation and work. We have currently 9 people and 9 organizations signed up for the Partners Forum. We might be able to squeeze in 1 or 2 more if everyone keeps to the time. So if that's the case, if you want someone, if you want the chance to speak, you have the chance to do so. Okay, then as I said in the afternoon, we'll have the thematic breakout sessions, the corners. Then we'll have the couple of extra sessions as well on Syrians in Turkey. We'll have a journey through the Nepal earthquake. And then we'll conclude with reporting back from the corners and some closing remarks from Cihan Sultanoğlu, the UNDP director for the region of Europe and CIS. So that's essentially what the program looks like for today. Perhaps the other thing to say is that whereas yesterday we were focusing on big issues in the plenary, lots of policy level discussion, the focus today is going to be much more on programming, projects, what we're actually doing to address challenges of risk management and building resilience in our countries, in our communities, and in our programming. So that's pretty much what we have on track for today. All right. Are there any questions or unclarities that we could clear up at this point? Okay, then thank you very much.
Thank you. I think it's time to bring back another familiar face. He set the stage for us yesterday, and today, with the first panel rather, and today he'll be delivering a keynote address on the Sustainable Development Goals, Risks, and Resilience of Agenda 2013. Pedro Conceicao. 2030, sorry. United.
Thank you. I think keynote is perhaps too formal for what I intend to do here. I just want to share some personal reflections on how I think about risk, resilience, as we seek to support countries in the implementation of the 2030 agenda. So to set the context, I think it's important to reflect back to the MDGs, because in my view, implicitly at least, I think there was not a real recognition during the MDGs of the potential impact of shocks and volatility in the pursuit of the goals. I think that implicitly there was this assumption that progress was going to move along more or less steady progress, and that there would not be that much that would throw countries off as they sought to reduce poverty by half and meet the other MDGs. But if there's something that we have learned over the period, the 15 years of the MDGs, is that that's actually not how the world works, obviously. We had the global financial and economic crisis in 2008, 2009. We had a conflict in Syria, the Arab Spring around 2011, 2010, 2011, then the conflict in Syria that had implications here in the region and beyond. We had the Ebola crisis that affected West African countries around 2014. And more recently, in Latin America, there has been a sharp slowdown in economic activity. I don't know how much you're aware about what's happening in Latin America, but some of the countries have been affected by the most severe recessions on record. And so as a result, in 2015 alone, in Latin America, 5 million people moved towards poverty. So the ranks of the poor in Latin America have actually increased as we're reaching the end of the MDGs. Now, in the MDGs, this doesn't make that much of a difference, because remember, the goal was to reduce poverty by half, and these countries had made quite a lot of progress. But in the SDGs and the 2030 agenda, the aspiration is quite different, and it's much more ambitious. It's about leaving no one behind. So if we are serious about meeting this aspiration of leaving no one behind, we have to look and understand how and what are the dynamics of shocks that throw people back into poverty. And so I will share with you some of my personal reflections and thoughts on what we need to do differently to be effective in supporting countries on SDG implementation. But just to motivate my thinking a little bit, I will tell the story of what happened in Syria according to a recent study. So Syria, in 2005, was hit by the most severe drought on record. It got worse in 2006 and 2007, and there's very strong evidence that this drought is linked to climate change. So by 2008, Syria suffered its driest winter on record. And the drought hit agriculture dramatically. Agriculture was a mainstay of the economy in Syria and an important source of livelihoods for many people in the country. So between 2007 and 2008, food prices increased by almost double. Populations in rural areas were hit by this combination of an increase in food prices and a drop in income. Malnutrition rates for children increased dramatically. Enrollment rates dropped by as much as 80%. So what did these people do? They moved from rural areas into peripheral areas around cities. As many as 1.5 million Syrians moved into the neighborhood of cities. This was added to 1.5 million Iraqi refugees that have been moving into Syria over the last few years. So by 2010, 20% of the urban population in Syria was composed of internal displaced Syrians as well as Iraqi refugees. So these people arrived to these places and they had to settle illegally. They faced not many services. Crime was rampant, no employment opportunities. And so about 6 years ago, in March 2011, it was in these parts of Syria that the uprising started to emerge. So the point of this story is not to say that there is causality between climate change or the drought and the uprising in Syria, but just to illustrate the interconnection between a number of factors that are coming together to create instability. And in discussions around the conflict in Syria, you often don't hear the discussion around these interconnections. And so this is my main message, is that for us to be effective in understanding risk and in putting in place measures to enable us to help countries to manage risk better, to pursue the SDGs, we have to have a much more integrated approach into how we look into drivers of risk and instability. So I will now share with you the three thoughts that I wanted to say about more concrete things that we can perhaps do. And I'll mention three aspects. I think first we need to be much more systematic in the way we do analysis. So to go back to the Syrian example, we cannot just say unambiguously that any weather shock or any natural hazard is going to lead to political instability or to violent conflict. Obviously, that is not the case. But we do need to understand how a weather shock or natural hazard interacts with economic systems, with livelihoods, as well with political and social systems in ways that may lead to instability. So we need to spell out much more clearly the causal links, the connections, and understand in a much more precise way how these interconnections unfold. I'll just give an example on this to illustrate the kind of analysis that I think we need to make. It's often asserted that inequality contributes to conflict, for instance, or political instability. But that is actually not the case. There are very unequal societies that are very peaceful. The evidence suggests, though, that horizontal inequality, and this is an insight that we owe to Francis Stewart, horizontal inequality, which is inequality between groups of people that are driven by identity or by characteristics of the population, gender inequality, for instance, an example of horizontal inequality, or inequality along religious affiliation or inequality along ethnic lines. These kind of horizontal inequalities can interact with political systems in a way that leads to instability. So we need to spell out much more clearly what are the linkages between the sources of instability that come from the economic, the social, and the environmental sector. I think in a way this is why the 2030 Agenda and the SDGs are so wide in scope compared to the MDGs, because there's a realization that we cannot just concentrate on reducing poverty, for instance, without ignoring what's happening in the other areas. So this is the first thing that I think we need to do. Secondly, I think we need to rethink financing, the way we go about deploying resources to help countries to support the SDGs. I mean, not the UN, but the international community, domestically, all of us. Because the way in which financing deals with risk is still very much focused primarily on providing resources after the shock hits. And that's human nature. Human nature is, it's much easier to mobilize resources and attention when people are already suffering or already suffering a shock. It's very difficult to make a case to invest in prevention or insurance, and we had a very interesting discussion on insuring yesterday. But clearly, that is not going to be enough to take us to the SDGs. We do need to have a much more systematic approach to financing and investing in prevention, and have a much more insurance-like thinking in the way we go about deploying resources. Because financing is really about deploying resources in the most efficient way. So I'll just give a concrete example about the kind of ideas that can be brought to bear to illustrate this new thinking that I think is needed when it comes to financing. And the example is about macroeconomic issues and the difficulties that many countries see themselves in once they are hit by a shock. So if I go back to the examples that I gave at the beginning, after the global economic and financial crisis, many countries around the world, in Europe, were affected by that crisis because the slowdown in economic activity was so severe that they could not generate enough revenue to meet their debt obligations. Similarly, after the conflict in Syria, countries like Lebanon and Jordan, which already had very high levels of debt, found themselves with difficulties in meeting their debt obligations. And the countries that were affected by Ebola in West Africa also had a sharp slowdown in economic activity and also had problems with servicing their debt obligations. So what do we do? I mean, sooner or later we come up with a way of providing some degree of debt relief. Certainly that was the case in the countries in West Africa, where there was a deal to provide debt relief. But this takes time to negotiate, it's protracted, it's uncertain, creates all sorts of difficulties. And so the idea here is whether it is possible to think of financial instruments, debt instruments, in which the obligations are tied to the level of economic activity. So that in good times, countries may be asked to pay a little bit more, but when they go into bad times, then they are given a little bit of a break and a little bit of relief automatically. So one way of doing this is to link the debt obligations to the level of GDP, or to the performance of GDP, the gross domestic product. So in good times, countries pay a little bit more. When GDP comes down, countries do not need to pay as much, are giving a little bit of a break. So this embeds automaticity and takes away the ad hoc nature of the way in which we deal with some of the debt problems. This idea of GDP-linked bonds is actually being used in many cases. It's not a fantasy. It's been used, for instance, by Ukraine in the context of their debt restructuring. And some countries like Grenada, for instance, which is very vulnerable to natural disasters, have recently issued bonds in which they have a clause that say that if the country is hit by a hurricane, they have some time of grace before they need to pay their debt obligation. So the point here is not so much to discuss the merits of this specific instrument, but to illustrate the kind of thinking that I think is required when it comes to financing, to be better prepared to manage risk. And see, the advantage of this is that it doesn't matter what the nature of the shock is. It can be an economic shock, it can be a health shock, it can be a natural hazard that turns into a disaster. It really doesn't matter. And the country is always able to adjust automatically to the new context. The third example, or the third implication, has to do with the need for us to develop new tools and instruments to help policymakers to be much more efficient and effective in handling risk. So the example I want to give is about a tool that we are developing in UNDP that we call POV-Risk. And this tool basically helps countries to determine what are the characteristics that make people more vulnerable to fall back into poverty, and what makes it easier for people to move out of poverty. We've applied this tool in many countries in Latin America, and the findings are startling in that these determinants of people sliding back to poverty or moving out of poverty vary from country to country. They are very different from country to country, and they are also asymmetric. What protects people, households, from moving back into poverty is different from what helps people to move into poverty, outside of poverty. And this tool has actually been applied in Albania, which was a country that was very successful in reducing poverty. Actually, from 2002 to 2008, the headcount poverty rate moved from about a quarter to 12%. But then, in 2008 up to 2012, it shot up to about 15%. So the results of the application of this tool in the case of Albania show that, for instance, the higher the age of the head of the household, the higher the likelihood or the probability that the household will move into poverty. And the higher the size of the household, the more protected the family is from moving into poverty. So based with this information, what this would allow countries is to design social protection. We spoke yesterday about social protection, but social protection or other policies that are much more efficient and effective in protecting people. So these were the three ideas that I wanted to share. And just in concluding, in the spirit of what Ben asked us to do, to think a little bit more about what we can do as the United Nations, I'll conclude by saying the following. In my view, we need to really move beyond this linear and formulaic understanding of shocks and instability. We have implicit, perhaps, an understanding that we have normality or normal countries. We have shocks, and then we have, could be conflict, could be a disaster linked to a natural hazard. Then we need to have some kind of recovery, and then we can have stability again. So that's sort of and the way we are structured as the United Nations is very much along these lines. There's what we sometimes call a divide between humanitarian interventions that go in immediately after a shock. We have the peace and security interventions that come once some political settlement and peace agreement is agreed to in the aftermath of conflict. So we have this linear and I think simplistic approach to how we deal with, frankly, risk. And I think that we need to really challenge this linearity, and we need to come together as the United Nations system in a way that brings all of our expertise in all countries, basically, and in all settings, in a way that enables us to do a systematic analysis of risk in the way that I highlighted earlier. There is really no other institution, I think, around the world, if there is, you can challenge me, that has expertise in so many different areas of human endeavor. The challenge for us as United Nations is to come together and support countries in the achievement of the SDGs by bringing together this integrated expertise, by speaking to each other. And so as you go into corners, because you have 3 corners, do go into your corner, but make sure that you speak to each other also. Because if we don't do this integrated approach to risk management and risk and understanding of risk, it's going to be very difficult for us to be effective in supporting countries in meeting the SDGs and the 2030 Agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Pedro. Thank you, Pedro. I think it's time now for the Partners Forum. Ben gave us a little idea what we're going to expect, but here to moderate is Pratibha Mehta. Get you up here.
From here. So we are also moving our perspective from analytical debate from yesterday to more programmatic and action-oriented dialogue today. So it's my great pleasure to moderate the UNDP Partners Forum. And I think Pedro has set a really, really good stage for this discussion. The emphasis and the importance that risk and resiliency requires a systematic, integrated, and continuous approach for risk management. And that it's extremely important for us to focus on our work that helps in addressing the root causes important for prevention of any crisis, conflict, and disaster, but at the same time simultaneously be prepared to respond to any emergencies that may occur. And so in this panel, we will hear from distinguished panelists in terms of how, through their programs and support, they are promoting this integrated approach, negotiating with development humanitarian nexus, and working both on addressing the root causes, but at the same time being prepared for emergency response. And so with great pleasure, I would like to invite the panelists for panel number 1. There'll be 2 panels back to back, one comprising of our UN agency colleagues, and second panel will consist of other international organizations, including some multilaterals and NGOs working in this region. And so with that, a great pleasure to invite the panel for the UN panel with Ms. Alanna Armitage, the UNFPA Regional Director for Eastern Europe and Central Asia, Ms. Ingibjorg Gisladottir, I hope I pronounced your name correctly, the UN Women Regional Director for Europe and Central Asia, Christoph Hamelmann, Head of WHO Office in Venice, Sophie Baranes, Senior Coordinator for the UN multi-agency project on capacity for disaster risk reduction initiatives based in Geneva, and Matteo Rosati, UNESCO Regional Bureau for Science and Culture in Europe. So it's first of all very good to see so many UNDP partners here on the panel. And because of the limitation of time, I would request each one of you to limit your remarks to 5 to 8 minutes so that there is time for question and answer. And would like to request each one of you to focus primarily on how your agencies are navigating the development humanitarian nexus, so to say, and working, promoting this continuous integrated approach from addressing the root causes to emergency response. So let me start with Alanna from UNFPA, and then we'll go sequentially and then open for question and answer. Alanna, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Pratibha. Good morning, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here, and let me start by thanking UNDP for organizing this wonderful dialogue, which I think has been incredibly high quality. The conversation yesterday was really so useful and very high quality. I think, yesterday we saw that the resilience of individuals and their communities is really at the center of Agenda 2030 and the SDGs, with its comprehensive people-centered approach and its commitment to leaving no one behind. So we also really welcome this Partners Forum. I think, as Pedro was saying just a minute ago, it gives each of us the opportunity to explain how we contribute to risk and resilience, but also how we can come together, in this case as a UN system, to support countries in managing the shocks and the crises and the other risks that we have seen in the region. Also to move beyond our own structures and break down these silos between development, humanitarian, and peace building. So again, I think this foray is really key. I know there are many partners to speak today, so I'll dive right into UNFPA's specific contribution that we bring to the region. As the population agency of the United Nations, I was actually struck yesterday by the number of times that population references were made during the discussions, from the real or perceived risks of demographic issues like population aging, urbanization, migration, low fertility, or the risks associated with the current rollback of women's rights, including those rights that relate to the most intimate and fundamental aspects of life, such as a woman's ability to decide when and how many children she would like to have. So the role of UNFPA in the region, I think, is very relevant, both as a development partner, but also as a humanitarian actor. And we do try to work with countries to respond to tomorrow's challenges today. We help countries use population data to better understand and address the region's demographic changes. And we help to ensure that reproductive health and rights of women and young people and achieving gender equality remain at the center of human development in the region. In the area of disaster risk reduction, UNFPA actually contributes expertise in 3 of the 7 global disaster risk reduction targets, which were set at the Sendai, within the Sendai framework for 2015-2030. Now, I think I have a slide there which basically sort of captures UNFPA's contribution in the area of risk and resilience. First, as I mentioned, as the Population Fund, we ensure that early warning risk assessments use population data. We help countries address the demographic specificities across development and humanitarian continuum, which really is an essential basis for planning and targeted responses. We support countries in civil registration and vital statistics, household surveys, and the analysis and dissemination of census data. We take into account the human development needs of different sex and age groups to ensure that population groups that might otherwise be neglected, left behind, such as young people, those facing sexual or gender-based violence, older women, migrants, IDPs, refugees, and people living with disabilities are included in development agendas. Data is also important, and I was reflecting on what we were talking about yesterday. I think data is also very important to ensure that our assessment of risk is actually based on evidence. And one of the examples that I think we see is that sometimes the perception of risk or the politicization of risk can lead to policy responses that are not always evidence-based or human rights-based. The issue in our region, and one that we deal with as UNFPA, the issue of low fertility and population decline is case in point. In some countries, the fear of population decline has actually led to policies and led to views that this is a threat to national security and national stability. And this has in turn led to pronatalist approaches which can restrict women's rights. Instead of investing in policies to ensure that women in particular can balance their family and their professional life. So UNFPA is working with countries to ensure that population dynamics are factored into all policies as a way to mitigate this risk. The second area is in this strengthening community safety nets. And yesterday we heard from several speakers that resilience is really within communities, it's within societies. So in this sense, we're working to ensure that interventions are demand-driven, led and owned by local communities. In the area of early recovery, we are helping to develop and make available multi-hazard warning systems and disaster risk information and assessments, again by supporting countries and partners such as statistical institutes to create relevant data sets with a focus on vulnerable groups. The other area is trying to improve the coherence between national development and humanitarian planning processes. And again, Pedro was mentioning this just now in his remarks. I think that focusing on risk and resilience is actually an excellent way to look at programming across the humanitarian development continuum. And one of the biggest challenges we face, of course, is that resources are often organized around different streams. And there is this systematic, this need for a more systematic approach to financing. So I think we can really strengthen synergies across the humanitarian development nexus if we develop more collective outcomes in close collaboration with all of our partners and stakeholders, looking at multi-year windows. Now, I won't go into details, but we do think that the new UNDP in Ukraine, under the leadership of our RC, who is sitting here, is actually a great example of an integrated approach. We are also committed to resilience building of health systems, and I know that my colleague from the World Health Organization will go much more into detail on this issue, but we also contribute in support of WHO to limit the disruption of basic services by promoting primary health service delivery and building resilience to ensure that we continue delivering reproductive, maternal, newborn, child, and adolescent health services in emergencies as well. And finally, at the core of UNFPA's mandate to deliver a world where every pregnancy is wanted, every childbirth is safe, and every young person's potential is fulfilled, we commit and invest in young people and women. And yesterday, again, we heard several speakers speaking about women and young people as the first responders and really the leading innovators of sustainable solutions during crises. The resourcefulness and energy of women really is the backbone of communities' resilience in sustaining households during difficult times and bringing their often unseen wisdom, problem solving, and hard work to their communities' recovery processes. So we do regard women and young people as key partners in preparedness, recovery, and response. So to conclude, I think I've used up my 8 minutes by now, Pratibha. I would just ask, again, how do we see the way forward for the UN system and our partners here? I think as Helen Clark said yesterday, volatility is the new normal. Crises will continue to happen and acute needs will continue to need to be met. But we do need to accelerate and really fundamentally shift the way we work. So I think that's what this partnership forum is about. We do this by looking at the 10-year-old girl who really is the face of our future. A girl who was 10 in 2015 when the Sustainable Development Goals were endorsed will be 25 when those goals are to be achieved in 2030. So for us, our ability to work together to make sure that this young girl's rights are protected and to make sure that her potential is fulfilled is really the litmus test of our efforts. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alanna, for first of all highlighting the importance of evidence-based risk management, but also linking early warning systems back to data collection and the challenge that we face of siloed funding and how do we do integrated action if the funding is siloed. So with that, let me move to our next panelist, Ingibjorg, the Regional Director of UN Women.
Thank you so much, and thank you to UNDP for organizing this very interesting dialogue. I echo my colleague Alanna with her things here. This has been very interesting and inspiring. Many of the discussions here have been quite inspiring, and I at least have learned a lot by sitting and listening to the colleagues that have been talking here. As you probably all know, UN Women is quite a new UN agency. I always say it's the only UN agency established in the 21st century. And the reason for that is that UN Women is supposed to tackle the unfinished business of the 21st century, which is gender inequality that we are supposed to work on and address in our work, and that is our core mandate. It's just to work on women's empowerment, gender equality and women's empowerment. And that's a universal mandate. It's not only a mandate that is applicable to developing countries, it's a universal mandate that we are supposed to work on in each and every country of the world. And therefore, we are not only focusing on development work in our work, we also have to look at other aspects as well. And what we realized in UN Women is that there has been insufficient attention has been paid to the inequality of risk for women and girls in conflict and disaster situations. Inequalities and discrimination that exist in time of peace and stability are only exacerbated in the time of war and instability. They are, they just grow. They get bigger in the time of instability and disaster. And having said this, I think I should just go to the mantra of the women's movement that goes, nothing for us without us. And that's important. When it comes to women, you cannot develop programs, you cannot provide services, you cannot develop policies or respond to humanitarian crisis that impact women without involving women in the planning and decision-making on these plans and programs. They have to be everywhere where decisions are made, where service is developed that has an impact for them. So that is where we maybe come in. We also realized in UN Women in the beginning, we were not involved much in humanitarian work. And we realized that we have to be there. It's too late just to step in when the development work starts. We have to be at the initial stage. And in the recent years, we have been more and more getting engaged in working on gender and disaster risk reduction. And we have been responding to the floods and mudslides in Bosnia-Herzegovina, in Serbia, in Macedonia, in Tajikistan. We were also involved in the humanitarian work in Ukraine, supporting the engendering of the humanitarian plans in Ukraine. We have also carried out rapid assessments of our own, and we have found out in most of the countries where we have been working that gender-responsive disaster preparedness, response and recovery plan is needed. So we need to step in and ensure that this happens. Because even though women are effective first responders, as just in their own families and communities, they are not well represented in the state bodies that provide assistance. They're also missing in the national level policy making, as national gender machineries and the women's movement or women's organizations are rarely consulted in national disaster platforms and policy dialogues. This is happening in spite of the fact that in conflicts, for example, I'm not talking about natural disasters, I'm talking about disasters, man-made disasters like in conflicts, that women are increasingly being targeted in the wars, for example in Syria and Afghanistan, where women are directly targeted, and rape is often used as a weapon in wars, as has happened in Afghanistan and Syria. Although we see that perpetrators are being increasingly, there is at least substantial progress to strengthen the normative basis to punish the perpetrators, then implementation has been very slow in most countries. And it's actually, it is quite amazing that still now 20 years after the conflict in Bosnia-Herzegovina, we are now implementing programs. We are developing at normative level legislation, and we are implementing programs now with UNDP in support of reparation for survivors of conflict-related sexual violence. 20 years after the conflict, we are addressing this issue. That's quite late. And we think what's happening now in Syria, then the question is, are we going to address that 20 years after that conflict, or are we going to address it now? So we need really to have this focus. I also want to mention here that one of the things that we are working on is shall we say, work on, to help women, the survivors of conflict-related violence, sexual violence, to overcome the stigma that is against them in most countries. And what we have seen is that there is, unfortunately, limited political willingness and financial resources to support survivors, to regain a sense of empowerment, and to sustain transformative change in post-conflict societies. And this is one of the areas where we are stepping in and trying to work with increasing political willingness, increasing the resources that are needed to support these survivors of conflict-related sexual violence and empowering them in their everyday life. I think I should maybe last mention here one of the areas that we have been working on, which is in the area of refugees. I'm not going to go into the service provision for refugees. A lot has been said about that. What I'm going to mention here is a study that we have been working on here in the regional office on the, shall we say, the asylum seekers, or how there is an insufficient basis for women to receive refugee status in most countries in the European Union. We see that, there are a lot of people, and the majority last year of the people that went or tried to get into the European Union as refugees were women and children. But at the same time, we see that women represent less than a third of all asylum applicants in the EU, which is, you see that more than half of those who now are living as refugees and trying to get into the European Union are women and children, but only less than a third of the asylum seekers. So there's a discrepancy between these two. And I think one of the reasons is that gender-based persecutions is not a sufficient basis to receive a refugee status in most countries of the European Union. The Refugee Convention is from 1959, and it provides 4 bases for refugee status, and it's without any reference to gender or violence against women. It's just, it is a convention from 1959, and there's a protocol from 1967, and this is before, all this dialogue, all this discussion or understanding of gender becomes part of everything we do. So, unfortunately, there's a lack of a common definition of gender-based persecution in the legislation of most EU countries. Definitely it's not part of the conventions, but that is very much needed and needs to serve as a self-standing form of persecution that is worthy of refugee status in national legislation. And that's also where we are working. I refer to our universal mandate. We are also working in countries that are not developing countries, and this is one of the things that we would like the European Union to do more on, and we think that the European Union can take some steps in this area. I think I'll just stop here, but we can, I'm willing to answer questions if there are any. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And really, thank you for reminding nothing for us without us. and the importance of gender-sensitive and gender-disaggregated analysis and response across development and emergency situations. So with that, let me move to Christoph, Head of Office, WHO, Venice.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. It's really a pleasure for me to be here at the Istanbul Regional Hub, my former professional home. And I had the privilege to be part of the first dialogue, and I must congratulate the team of the Hub to what you have developed, the dialogue over time and the great visibility. So I'm very happy to be here today. I will begin with actually your concept note, which was distributed, and the reminder that resilience may refer to circumstances or activities that reduce the likelihood of identified risk events occurring, or secondly, reduce the impact when they do occur, or thirdly, help people to quickly recover from their impact, and fourthly, can address both standard development challenges while also addressing humanitarian needs. That's a very good conceptual context for my few remarks. And I want to start with our main work, reducing the likelihood of risks occurring in the first place. Here we have the WHO Euro Policy Framework, Health 2020, which is agreed by 53 member states in 2012. It has two main strategic objectives. The first is improving health for all and reducing health inequalities. Inequalities is a major risk factor in itself and at the same time a major modifier for impact and recovery in emergencies. And the second objective is improving leadership and participatory governance for health. Participatory governance is a key element for resilience and for reduction of inequalities. There are also 4 priority areas for policy action highlighted in the Health 2020 framework. First one is investing in health through a life course approach, empowering people. Second is tackling major health challenges of communicable and non-communicable diseases. Third one, strengthening people-centered health systems, public health capacity and emergency preparedness, surveillance and response, and creating resilient communities and supportive environments. We regard individual and population health and well-being as a critical factor for resilience. Our health concept includes not only the treatment and care for people who have gotten ill, but very strongly also the prevention of ill health and the promotion and protection of health across the sectors, health in all policies. I'm now coming to the more emergency and crisis-related context, and here we have first the International Health Regulations from 2005, which by some surprise survived many of the various previous reviews. They prescribe how to assess, report and respond to public health hazards, assess and strengthen national public health structures and core capacities, and they are very specific in the formulation of risk assessments to declare public health emergency of international concerns. And once such a public health emergency has been declared, of determining and recommending measures. The international health regulations are legally binding to states parties of the WHO and WHO, 140 countries and territories in the moment. The other important framework for us is the Emergency Response Framework. It lays out procedures for WHO action in emergency situations, including the gradings from 1 to 3, 3 the highest, and coordination with other partners in humanitarian crisis situations. In this regard, WHO role under the ISCS is the lead of the Global Health Cluster with over 30 partners. And WHO is also a member of other global clusters, nutrition, water, sanitation, emergency shelter, and protection, with the responsibilities for standards and policy setting, building response capacity, and operational support. So far, the paper and the good resolution and the policies, and then came the Ebola crisis. And you all know what happened during the Ebola crisis, and not all went so well, particularly in the beginning. So there were afterwards quite a couple of commissions and review to strengthen and improve the system. One of them was the high-level panel on global response to health crisis, appointed by the UN Secretary General in April 2015. In my further remarks, please note the timeline, because now things become relatively fast. April 2015, the commission was set up by the Secretary General. It made already reference to a review committee of the post-Ebola review of the international health regulations. The report was published in February 2016 with some 27 recommendations for national and regional and international levels, among them to ask again for full compliance and a much stricter monitoring system of the international health regulations and their implementation. It asked WHO to establish a unified, effective operational capacity for emergency. It called for higher funding, including a WHO contingency fund for emergency, and it asked and requested WHO to work closely with development actors. Now, a couple of months later, the World Health Assembly in May 2016, the Director General provided a report of this new health emergency program which WHO is currently developing. And the new health emergency program represents nothing else than the fundamental development for our organization, complementing WHO's traditional technical and normative role with new operational capacities in emergency situations, covering the whole continuum of preparedness, readiness, response, and recovery. That's quite a challenging task for organizational readjustment in a very short time. In more detail, it means building a very clear and effective command chain with one workforce, one budget, one line of accountability, one set of processes and systems, and one set of benchmarks. At the same time, it requires to link up this chain of command and earmarked workforce with the remaining organizational structure, with the various external partnerships, and with the other mainstream work of WHO on health and development. In principle, it is nothing else than the task to build one organizational platform that can deliver technical and normative work on health in the context of sustainable development, and at the same time emergency preparedness and response, including its operational aspects. That's an opportunity and a great challenge. As 2017 will be the year of the appointment of the new DG, we will surely have interesting times ahead. Coming back to the Health 2020, health in all policy means nothing else than health in all SDGs. This reflects the concept of universal health coverage along the continuum of health promotion and protection and disease prevention, treatment, care, and support. It reflects the main task to reduce health inequalities and to leave no one behind. We are committed, and we have taken steps to work on this closely with other UN agencies, governments, and all stakeholders. It means optimizing investments in a way that they maximize the co-benefits for health and sustainable development, and we are talking here about investments across all sectors. Our steps reflects the recommendations of the high-level report on global response to health crisis, underlying the relevance of the SDGs in this context, and the recommendations of the quadrennial comprehensive policy review of operational activities for development of the UN system. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And really, WHO has the most important role on norms, standards, and linking it to program and action. And I hope we'll have more time to get into details of how it's in reality being implemented to bring preparedness, response, recovery under one chain of command, one budget, and one program. A very, very interesting restructuring process going on in WHO. But let me move to Sophie, Senior Coordinator for Capacity for Disaster Reduction Initiative, and then to Matteo from UNESCO, and then we'll open for question answers.
Thank you very much. And good morning to you all. I'm going to talk briefly about CADRI, but mostly I'm going to try to draw a number of lessons from the application of the CADRI model and try to see to what extent the UN system is fit for purpose when it comes to supporting government in resilience programming. So CADRI briefly is the capacity, it stands for the Capacity for Disaster Reduction Initiative, and it's a global UN-led partnership, which is composed of 13 UN and non-UN partners. So you have here, as a really critical executive agency, FAO, UNDP, UNICEF, OCHA, WFP, and WHO, and a number of others who are observers. You will also note that there are other key players in DRR, such as IFRC, and the World Bank Global Facility for Disaster Risk Reduction. So basically, it extends the potential for coherence way beyond the UN system. So what do we do at CADRI? It's a mechanism, or if you want, it's a facility through which government and UN country teams can mobilize expertise to support capacity development processes in disaster risk reduction. And it's meant to promote more coherent programming in capacity development for disaster risk reduction. Since its creation in 2007, it has really evolved significantly. It used to be a training program, and now it's really a much broader capacity development initiative. And I would like to touch a bit on what has motivated those partners to basically establish this partnership. It was established to address three main issues. The first one was exactly that, the divide between humanitarian and development agencies. On one hand, disaster risk reduction was very much seen as a business of the civil protection agencies, the Ministry of Interior, and of course, all humanitarian actors. And on the other hand, more and more it has emerged as a governance issue, and it became the business of Ministry of Planning, land management, local government, and of course Ministry of Environment and all sectors. But there was still very much this divide between actually government agencies when it comes to DRR and of course actors, humanitarian and development actors. The second issue that the CADRI partners wanted to address was also the piecemeal international support, very fragmented assistance to support disaster risk reduction, and lack of alignment with national priorities. And also including within the UN system a lot of overlap. I remember I've done some kind of analysis some years back about UN system intervention in disaster risk reduction and resilience programming more broadly. And it was really striking that many UN agencies were doing exactly the same thing, mostly working on institutional framework or working on early warning systems. And there were huge areas totally neglected, which are also very key in promotion of disaster risk reduction. And the third issue that the CADRI partners wanted to address was also the lack of tools and approaches to promote multi-sectoral collaboration. So as we say, when we want to reduce risk by the means of integrating risk reduction into development plans, this calls for a holistic approach working across all sectors. That's what we call the whole of government, whole of society approach. And this is a very complex change process which requires very strong government leadership to bring all sectors on board, but also to bring civil society and private sector. And that's obviously a daunting challenge. So CADRI was really designed to address those challenges. First, it does help bridge the humanitarian and development divide. It brings, as you see, a lot of humanitarian and development agencies together, and it also brings them to consider a more integrated approach to disaster risk reduction. For instance, it's how do you move from safety nets to risk-sensitive social protection. So it brings agencies to work together on thinking about this integrated solution. or how to translate, hydrometeorological and climate information. How do you use them not only for preparedness, but how do you use them for prevention? So it brings those different actors to work together. To some extent, it also, we feel CADRI helps reduce fragmentation and increase coherence. The main deliverables of CADRI is basically to bring partners around a common diagnosis of capacity gaps in disaster risk reduction and a common set of priorities. So the key deliverable of CADRI, it's a process, but at the end of this process is really a coherent framework for capacity development in disaster risk reduction. And lastly, CADRI also helps with the adoption of multi-sectoral approaches to reduce disaster risk. How do we do that? It's really because we draw on the huge diversity of expertise of the UN system. And if we can go back to the slide before, sorry. The slide before that, yes. So you see here all sectors are covered. So, I mean, not all sectors, but right now 9 sectors. We are still developing new sectoral tools. So you really see we bring the diversity of expertise of all the member agencies to promote this multi-sectoral approach. Now, in terms of the results and the lessons, those tools, those methodologies of CADRI have been adapted in about 30 countries. And in CIS, I think about 7 countries were covered by CADRI, but that was the very early stage of CADRI, and much more recently, Georgia and Serbia. And I think the plan of action for Serbia has been adopted a few weeks ago. So I would like to share maybe 4 main lessons from this application of CADRI. The first one is positive, which is that the convening power of the UN system is definitely instrumental. It has proven to be instrumental in facilitating this type of multi-stakeholder processes at country level. But to be able to credibly play this role, the resident coordinator needs to be backed up with high-level technical expertise. And this is what CADRI can bring. But in many countries, it has actually really proven to be quite efficient. The second lesson is that the UN system with limited resources can really influence change because of this diversity of expertise agencies can bring. The agencies can reach out to different sectors, to many socioeconomic sectors, to influence the design of risk-sensitive sector policies, or for instance, through the rollout of the decentralization reform, can also go down to influencing local development plans. The third lesson is that the UN system is not necessarily equipped with the programming tool and approach for risk-sensitive programming. What we really need to move from the standalone DRR project that we love to do to promote risk-informed development. And it's really a different setup within all our agencies. It's a different way of thinking, a different way of programming. So a lot of agencies are making progress. FAO has developed a whole concept of climate-smart agriculture. UNICEF has done a lot of work in terms of climate-sensitive WASH, risk-sensitive social protection. But in terms of the services that we propose, our member states, that we make available, I really feel that we need to adapt much more our services to remain relevant. Because the government demands are really evolving fast. And what we see more and more emerging as needs that they want support for risk assessment. And the UN system is not so clear about how do we go about supporting together risk assessment. They also need decision tools for prioritization, decision tool in terms of selecting what is the best risk financing modality. Also simple methodologies for cost-benefit analysis. This is what we get from ministries of planning. I mean, when you need to really decide what do you do on disaster risk reduction, you need very specific tools, and the UN system is not there yet, or not in a very articulated common offer. What we also see is that more and more just acting on disaster risk reduction may become a bit irrelevant. When we present CADRI to our country teams or governments, they like it, they love it, but they say, but you know, I mean, somehow we need a tool to help us integrate climate and disaster, to help us integrate climate, disaster, environment convention, and conflict risk into our SDGs. Risk informs the SDGs. So cadre is very nice, but again, we need something broader. Maybe you need to think about, having this tool evolve. So, of course, I'm not saying the UN is not working on that. We have now Inform. We developed this global risk index, and now we're starting designing what we call national pilots for Inform together as a UN system, which is really making risk information available for government as decision-making tool. There is also a lot of work ongoing between OECD and the UN system on resilience programming tool, resilience system analysis. I can elaborate more on that if you have questions. But to be fit for purpose, again, we need to move in that direction, and if possible, jointly. And it's also how, for instance, do we integrate risk into the MAPS process? And how do we make the MAPS process more, UN, more like a UN system process? The last lesson is in relation to accountability tool. This cadre partnership, in a number of cases, this whole multi-sectoral, multi-stakeholders process that was supported by cadre with a high cost for the agencies. A cadre process is like 18 months of engagement at country level with all the agencies mobilizing their expertise from headquarters, from regional level. But sometimes it has not resulted in any significant change in the UN programming, for instance. So maybe they need to develop a much stronger monitoring and accountability tool at the executive board level, or it can be part, of course, of the QCPR process, but to ensure that really we enforce our new resilience and risk management programming guidance. That it's not only in a vacuum somehow. So I think I will stop here. Thank you very much, and information about cadre, you can find them on www.cadre.net. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Of course, there are many challenges to integrated analysis and integrated implementation, but at least there's a good start. So let's move to UNESCO, to Matteo Rosati.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Let me start by congratulating UNDP and the organization team for this brilliant event, and thank you for inviting UNESCO. I wish to convey best regards by the Director of the Regional Bureau for Science and Culture in Europe, Ms. Thompson-Flores, who wished to be with you today and couldn't make it due to previous engagements. UNESCO's role and action to support resilience and risk reduction is multifaceted, as in the nature of the specific mandate and specialized mandate of the organization, operating at the interface between education, the sciences, culture, and communication. Alone or in collaboration with UN agencies and other partners, UNESCO is a catalyst for international cross-disciplinary cooperation in many aspects of disaster risk reduction and response. Education is, of course, a top priority in building resilience and risk preparedness. I would like today to focus especially on one emerging threat, which is violent extremism. Across the world, we see crimes against humanity increasingly perpetrated in the name of extremist ideologies. In responding to this threat, education is key to develop skills for critical thinking and competencies for dialogue across cultures. UNESCO is helping countries deliver education programs that help build learners' resilience to violent extremism, strengthening the capacities of national education systems to contribute to prevention efforts within the framework of the Global Citizenship Education Initiative. This includes equipping learners of all ages with the knowledge, values, and behaviors to foster responsible global citizenship and to become proactive contributors to a more peaceful, tolerant, inclusive, and secure world. UNESCO also empowers schools, communities, and governments in the identification of the hazards and risks they are exposed to by setting standards and methodologies for school safety. A comprehensive framework for school safety has been adopted by the Global Alliance for Disaster Risk Reduction and Resilience, of which UNESCO holds the Secretariat. The organization also supports governments in the integration of disaster risk reduction into school curricula, training teachers and students in the process. As the next of kin of education, culture is a key driver and enabler for peace and sustainable development. As the only UN agency with a mandate on culture, UNESCO spearheads international efforts to protect cultural heritage and promote the diversity of cultural expressions. This includes providing standards, guidelines, advocacy, and technical assistance for the integration of a sustainable development perspective in the different fields of heritage safeguarding, tangible and intangible. Different milestones, policy documents have been approved, and their implementation is being prompted to enhance the biunivocal and synergic relation between culture and development, including in its dimensions related to risk and resilience. In the prevention of natural disasters, traditional knowledge, especially when combined with scientific knowledge, can be critical in the early detection of and preparedness to environmental risks, including those related to climate change. The significance of culture in the lives of communities and individuals as an anchor for identity and belonging makes its continuity a powerful tool for building resilience and for healing the social and psychological impact of a disaster or conflict. This includes the physical reconstruction of heritage lost to natural or human-made disasters, which allows communities to recover a sense of hope, dignity, empowerment, and to revive local economies. In the face of more frequent and extreme natural events and deliberate attacks against culture, UNESCO established in 2005 the Heritage Emergency Fund, a multi-donor special account for the protection of heritage in emergency situations as part of the UNESCO-led global initiative Unite for Heritage. UNESCO also seeks to lever culture by integrating a concern for it in humanitarian policies, peace-building, and peacekeeping strategies. To this end, a greater advocacy, including within the UN system, is necessary to establish the institutional processes for integrating a cultural component within humanitarian and peacekeeping operation frameworks. UNESCO continues to support member states in implementing heritage-sensitive disaster risk reduction and resilience measures according to the culture and heritage-related provisions of the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction. Building on earlier efforts, such as the Strategy for Disaster Risk Reduction at World Heritage Properties, UNESCO developed in 2014 a chapter on culture in the PDNA methodology to enable an integrated impact assessment of disasters on the sector and to define the main lines of response. A greater coordination to ensure the systematic integration of culture within the scope of the PDNA process is also necessary, including through synergies across UN agencies and respective PDNA sectors. To this end, UNESCO is developing training initiatives on PDNA culture and reviewing the PDNA culture exercises undertaken so far in order to identify key lessons and improve its methodology. With regard to armed conflicts, in 2005 a new strategy was adopted for the reinforcement of UNESCO's action for the protection of culture and the promotion of cultural pluralism in the event of armed conflict. An action plan for the strategy's implementation is to be presented next month at the Executive Board of UNESCO, which also includes the further development of partnerships with organizations outside of the culture sector. In addition, UNESCO works on the establishment of a rapid response mechanism for the protection of cultural heritage in emergency situations for use in peacekeeping missions. With regard to the sciences, UNESCO leads the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission and several international and intergovernmental scientific programs. UNESCO has been active in disaster risk reduction since the 1960s, with studies on earthquakes, oceanography, and natural hazards preparedness. Nowadays, our work is mostly aimed at promoting scientific exchange, advice, and training in order to establish effective early warning systems for different hazards, preparedness measures, and emergency response procedures. In particular, through its different academic and institutional network, UNESCO promotes knowledge exchange in geological, hydrometeorological, and marine hazards, conduct activities to improve quality of data, early warning, hazard mapping, and vulnerability assessments, facilitate interinstitutional and regional cooperation, and promotes the implementation of ecosystem-based disaster risk reduction. These meetings, ladies and gentlemen, takes place, as we all know, during turbulent times for Europe and the world, and gearing up for resilience in a time of profound and rapid changes is extremely challenging. The risk and resilience scenario, in addition, is especially broad and complex and articulated, and our common capacity as UN agencies to be relevant and deliver results greatly depends, and it was mentioned by our previous speakers, on our ability to develop partnerships, leveraging our respective competencies and added values. And so within this framework, along the lines that I have just mentioned, UNESCO is ready to act its part. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So you have heard from UNDP partners, UNFPA, UN Women, UNESCO, WHO, and a multi-sectoral, multi-agency project on how we have started internally to approach development and humanitarian emergency situations in an integrated manner. We have already crossed the time limit for this session, but I think I can take liberty as moderator and open the floor for some question answers. Maybe we can take a few questions and take maybe 5 to 7 minutes for discussion. So the floor is open for any comments or any questions. Neil.
Discussions. Is this like that? There we go. So I don't want to make it a long question. I'm really concerned about how do we move from humanitarian to resilience and recovery, and acknowledging that the donors are not really built that way. The donors, we have Denmark has just recently come up with an integrated framework, including everything. The Canadians are usually really flexible. Countries like the United States and the EU have completely different departments and very different approaches. That you can't mix these two up. So would like to hear from any of the panelists if you have any insights on how these same kinds of obstacles exist at the country level. But my question refers more to the donor side of the equation. Do you see ways in which we can meaningfully push donors to look at the clear linkages between these two and fund initiatives which are in this gray area? Certainly, Ukraine is the country where most I see the linkages. There's no simple humanitarian solution. There's no simple recovery solution. There's an ongoing conflict. But the real solutions are in that gray area between humanitarian response and getting people's jobs, and getting them back to their livelihood. So I would welcome any insights on how we push the donor community to be more flexible with those questions. Thank you.
We all know that the system within the UN is not perfectly set up to allow us to be as effective as possible in bridging the humanitarian development divide. One thing, if you could change one thing to make your work better for your agency in this respect, what would it be? Thank you.
let's start with those two questions. And I think the issue of financing is crucial in promoting integrated, or let's say a continuum response from development to humanitarian to the in-between gray areas. Who would like to take this question? And then, of course, each one of you, if you can take half a second, in what would you change? Financing. I think, is there any donor in the audience? Maybe we can throw the question to somebody in the audience who represent donor community. No one. So, well, maybe you can be very aspirational in your recommendations.
Can we say something?
Yes.
Well, thank you, Neil, for this question about the donor community. Of course, there has to be, we are here participating in a development dialogue on risk and resilience. And of course, we have to have this dialogue with the donor community. It's not enough that we just talk, with the converted ones or with each other. We need to talk and have this dialogue with the donor community. So there's a common understanding on the necessity to bridge from humanitarian to development. I think that's the first step. Having said that, I'm not sure I agree with you that, all the donors are so strict on either, funding humanitarian or development. I think we see it in many conflict settings. For example, I worked in Afghanistan for 2 years, and it's difficult to say, where is the line between humanitarian and development. It's very much, related, and the donors were, I think there was an understanding, at least there, of this connection, and there's not a lack of funding in Afghanistan, that I can tell you. So I don't know if this is necessarily, true everywhere. But yeah, I think I'll stop there.
Actually, I mean, I totally agree, and we've seen that it's extremely difficult to walk the talk for the donors, because this dialogue on resilience, we've been having it for like, I don't know, 7 years. And there are still, I mean, when you look at DEFCO and ECHO, to take one example, but all of them, I mean, even the FID to some extent, it's really very difficult to actually tap into a funding source for prevention. I mean, to some extent, a bit, you can tap into the emergency fund for preparedness, but it's really difficult to find any source of funding for DRR, and for prevention, it's not that easy. I don't have any answer, but I guess maybe Emily will elaborate a bit on that. It's also about maybe more advocacy in terms of, always the cost of, the benefits of investing in prevention. I guess that could, to some extent, work, engage more with the DAC OECD when it comes to, guidance on aid and how it should be managed. I don't know. But it's really challenging. I mean, we have not really seen a real change in donor behavior, so difficult to walk the talk. Yeah.
It's a very complex question, but I think a recommendation to IDD is maybe we should also have donors in audience, especially for these kind of issues, because it's a systemic issue. It's an attitudinal issue, but it's also systemic issues, because the donor community is not structured to deal with an integrated response. They are mainly structured in silos. But let's park this question, because we have another panel from other international organizations, and they can reflect on it. But if you would like to take just a few seconds so that we can wrap and get into panel B, and I think we'll continue this dialogue with the panel B as well. So would you like to take half a second and say what is it that you would like to change?
Difficult in half a second, but a couple of seconds to answer Ben's question. I think that, in fact, I think we have the framework. So it's not what I would like to see. We have the framework. It's the Agenda 2030. It's the SDGs, we have the framework now available to change the situation and to work together. So the plea is really to make sure that we just all continue to work together. Before this meeting, UNDP organized the excellent meeting on the SDGs implementation in the region, and I think that was a very great step to bringing us all together around Agenda 2030, and that is the framework that we can use to transform. Thank you.
Yeah, I think both questions basically relate very much to each other. On the one hand, of course, we need to engage on global and on country level, so on both sides where the money flow is and the negotiations are. If it is an important thing to have the funding stream better organized, we simply need to step up to the urgent situation and be louder, jointly louder in our negotiations. And to Ben's questions, one thing which can be improved as long as the structures are as they are on the ground is our tactical skill to make even in those structures the best out of the situation. And that requires most often that within our own organizations, people on the ground, whether from the head of office, whether in the UN country team, whether in relation with the RC system, whether we really have all the understanding and the capacity and support each other to understand that switch between humanitarian and development work. There's a lot of training of our own staff internally to do, I think, when we want to improve the output there. Thank you.
Yes, thanks. What I would like to change, we are facing an internal issue within the organization when it comes to risk and resilience, which is also the way we work, which is very much compartmentalized along different sectors. So we are trying to overcome these divides, internal divides, and build intersectoral platforms and cooperation. And the same applies, of course, to our role in the broader UN system. The key issue, which I also have underlined before, is to build synergies so that we can speak with one voice and shift together from raising problems to offering solutions, which is also the only successful way to approach donors. I don't have a systemic answer to your question, but a pragmatic answer, which is dialogue, and more dialogue, to learn and speak the same language, to build a common ground.
I think with that, big round of applause to our panelists. So this was focusing on UN, and now we will move to other international organizations and NGOs. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Pratibha, if you don't mind, if we could actually just, before we bring on the second half of the panel, just maybe change up pace a little bit and actually just bring in another speaker before we continue on with you. As you all know, nearly 2 years ago, Nepal was devastated by two very powerful earthquakes. Nearly 9,000 people died in these tremors. Someone who actually covered this and its aftermath is Donatella Lorch. She's been a journalist for more than 20 years. She's worked with the New York Times, NBC News, as well as Newsweek. And please allow me to welcome her to the stage to talk about this. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Have a seat wherever you are. Oh.
It's a pleasure being here. Can everyone hear me? I need my clicker.
You need your clicker.
I need my clicker. So it's a little bit of a different sort of discussion. We should start. Can we put my first slide up? The one before that. There we go. In 2013, when I found out that my husband's job was going to take us to Kathmandu, one of the first things that I did was I went on the internet to try and find out schools and what one did in Nepal. And the first thing that came up and came up and came up was that there was going to be a catastrophic earthquake and that Kathmandu would be flattened. I mean, the scenario basically was that Kathmandu is a large valley that includes really 3 cities, which are Kathmandu, Patan, and Bhaktapur. But everyone now refers it to commonly as just Kathmandu. And it's on a lake bed, and it is the focal point. All of Nepal is highly, highly, highly seismic. So I did my research. I read all these articles, including the UNDP one that kept on coming up, and videos, which said that the scenario, and the guy who did this video said that he couldn't sleep at night because he was so worried about it. And he wasn't even living in Kathmandu, so you can imagine how I felt going over there. And the scenario was going to be that between 200,000 and 400,000 people would be killed in a 8+ magnitude earthquake that was imminent in Nepal at any moment, and that was overdue. And my husband told me, nah, don't worry, it's not like pregnancy. Earthquakes aren't overdue. So I said, okay, let's move there, and I prepared. Kathmandu is a city of 4 million people. It is badly built, not to code. It sits on major faults. It has haphazard urbanization, very narrow streets, and it was basically, it's a scene for utter and total disaster. The thing that happened was that there was an earthquake, but it didn't hit 8, and it got stuck. And it got stuck. I prepared. I made sure that I lived in the far south of the valley, so that in my mind, if there was going to be a massive earthquake, I was going to walk to India. I lived, which was not an option really, even when the earthquake happened. I prepared. I got fuel and water and enough for several weeks. We were under the UN security umbrella, my husband's job, so we followed UN rules. We had weekly radio calls to make sure that everyone was in communication. This was the night before the earthquake. Perfect example of the Nepalis are very religious. This is the festival of the Red God, and the Red God moves from a town outside of Kathmandu, right next to where I lived. I lived in the far southern end of the valley. And it goes for 3 months. It is dragged by a lot of people around the Patan and the area of the valley of Kathmandu. This is the night before, and the Nepalis believe that if the Rat, that little tower over there, falls, it augurs very, very badly for Nepal. And it has fallen in the past, and in the past when it has fallen, usually some problem has happened, a king has died, or there's been a war. The Nepalis also are very religious. They believe very much in fate. This is one of the Kumari Devis. She was very bored that day, so she was playing on her iPad. Because modernity and the ancient world coexist very well, as you will see from my next slide. And this, again, they believe, all my Nepali friends was like, oh, don't worry. If it's your karma to die, it's your karma to die. You just got to live, and we don't prepare because that's never going to happen. It's never going to happen. So, as I said, modernity coexists with the ancient traditions, and Nepal, for the 3rd year in a row, was host to the International Tattoo Convention, which was in downtown at the Yak and Yeti Hotel. And in fact, some of those guys, this was everything that I did the day before because I was doing a piece for National Public Radio on the National Tattoo Convention, which of course I never completed. So when it happened at 11:56 a.m. on a Saturday in April, on the 25th of April, which for Nepal's sake was incredibly lucky. It was daytime. Most of the casualties that happen in earthquakes happen in the night because we spend most of our time in our houses sleeping. It happened when it was warm, so most of the people were out. It was Saturday morning. Their kids were not in school, thankfully, because there were 9,000 dead, 500,000 people, 500,000 houses destroyed. It hit 14 of the 75 districts of Nepal, 3.5 million homeless, and 30,000 classrooms that were destroyed. So if it had been a school day, it would have been a massively, massively worse disaster. And 4,300 kilometers of roads were destroyed, which was a main means of getting any aid in and out of the country and in and out of the earthquake zones. These are my neighbors the first night. Again, I lived on the far south of the valley, so I was closer to some of the ancient Newar towns than I was into the chaos of central Kathmandu. And my husband wasn't there. He had told me he was going to be there for the earthquake, but he wasn't there. He was in Washington. So it was my son and myself. We had been driving to go to our traditional Saturday pizza lunch in Patan. And because I hated parking in the narrow streets of Kathmandu, I always went early so I could get the first parking place there. And when the earthquake hit, I thought initially I had a flat tire. I was driving down a steep hill. Then I thought I'd hit the motorcyclist who passed next to me and fell down. And I said, oh my God, I'm going to get in real trouble with the police. And then my car lifted up and fell down 3 times like that. And then everyone started screaming and all the walls started falling and everyone started running in the middle of the road. And I said, okay, it's an earthquake. And I'd seen a lot of videos on what to do, so at least I remembered vaguely you park in the middle of the road away from falling things, which is hard in Kathmandu because everything falls on you. And you turn off your engine and you you fold over like that. So the first night I went down to check out the local town just below me. It was full of screams and clouds of dust. And this is downtown Kathmandu as well. This is Kathmandu Darbar Square. The communities immediately turned to help each other. My community, which was a Newar community, basically offered me to sleep in their tents and to provide food. They immediately closed off their town. They did not get any outside help for at least 2 to 3 weeks. And they are considered almost part of the municipality of Lalitpur, but basically, a 15-minute walk from the big town. And they did not get any help. This is downtown Kathmandu, one of the main areas that is a police and army area. It's also a park, and it's one of the big open spaces. The big issue was finding open places where people could move into. So this is where they went over here. This is my little open space. I was very, very lucky, way better off than 90% of the people in the valley, because I had quite a big yard, and it's facing south. And I had go bags everywhere. I had go bags near my bed. I had go bags downstairs at the entrance. I had water. You can see my water back there. That's my drinking water. We had other water behind that little hut over there. That's my son and my dog, who was also very terrified. And it was still good weather. It poured the first night, and it was miserable, and the aftershocks were utterly terrifying. This is Bhaktapur, another one of the old Newar towns. This is the Darbar Square in Bhaktapur, also very badly destroyed. The first responders and the real heroes, as far as I was concerned on the government side, were the police and the army. And they went out. They did not, many of the police of Kathmandu did not go home to see what had happened to their own families for days. But there weren't enough of them. And they also had to go outside of Kathmandu. But this is what they did once this is a good month after the main earthquake. And by the way, we had, I would say, a dozen aftershocks the first day, and on average, at least 3 or 4 aftershocks a day for months. I think they're still having aftershocks right now, some of them quite big, above 5 on the Richter scale. And then, of course, on May 12th, there was the massive aftershock. That was a 7.3 aftershock. The big issue was water. It was believed that the catastrophic earthquake would have severed all the water pipes inside the Kathmandu Valley, which it didn't. It severed some, but not all. But the big problem for the valley was that it had blocked the roads, landslides. So since most of the valley relies on water being trucked in, the trucks couldn't come into the valley. In the countryside, what earthquakes often do is they redirect, the source of water gets redirected. So villages that once had a water spout no longer had a water spout. So I met these young girls in Sindhu Palchok, which is one of the hardest hit district after Gurkha. And they were walking. They had stopped going to school, and they were walking an hour and a half each way to get water because their water source had been redirected elsewhere. This is the town that was the Nawar town, one of the oldest Nawar towns in the valley that lived. It was basically maybe 300 meters from my house, down the road from my house, and which was about, I would say, more than 60% uninhabitable after the quake, and about 20% destroyed, like this building over here. No one came to them. No one came to help them. What the community did was they cordoned off. They evacuated the entire town. They cordoned it off. And they had guards there, self-appointed young men, and that would allow you in only under escort and only if you wore a hard hat. I don't know where they'd found their hard hats, but they had found their hard hats. This is even afterwards, this is also in Kokana. They had to continue farming. They moved out into the fields, and they moved out into the fields that they were planting, which was very hard for them because that would affect their crops for the coming year. This is a whole family. If you'll notice, the buildings where they lived were behind them over there on the left and that are totally destroyed. And so to quote a political scientist who put a Nepali political scientist who put it very well, though very nicely, why wasn't the government there? Cooperation among the government and action in the government for any functioning government would be an uphill challenge. But this is not just any government. He was talking about the Nepali government, and it is not part of the most functioning of governance. It still needs to learn how to prioritize goods and services to its own people before the earthquake, and now it was going to try and do it after the earthquake. I mentioned Sindhupalchok before, which is an eastern district of Nepal. This is the main street in Sindhupalchok. I drove up there a week to the day after the earthquake. And got there. There was police, an army, not that many of them because there weren't that many. There was nobody else. There were no NGOs. There was no one helping them out. There was just the people that were digging themselves out. We walked through the main street for a bunch of hours, but my son that I had brought with me because he did all his reporting trips with me, I wasn't going to leave him alone at home as a 10-year-old. He sort of turned to me and he says, "Mom, I've had enough destruction today. Can we go home?" And so that's when I turned around. There were 2 foreign search and rescue teams on the outskirts, and they just sat there all day long. It was the Japanese and somebody else. And they stayed there. They never entered the city. I found out later that they'd entered the city several days later. This is a town near the capital, and that's what it looked like. Back in Kathmandu, this is one of the search and rescue teams. There's a magical period in search and rescue for earthquakes. That is, well, really the first 48 hours are critical, and then as you wait longer and longer and longer, it is harder to find anyone who's alive. This is a good almost 2 weeks or a week and a half after the quake, and they still had the search and rescue teams there. This is in Kathmandu Darbar Square, and I was walking around. I did tours every 3 days or so. I would go and visit certain locations to see what was happening, what was changing, and talk to the local inhabitants. And they came, they stood. I don't know what they were doing there because everything had been searched. People had cleaned up everything. They brought in the markets that were selling vegetables there already. People were going back to as normal a life as they could, living outdoors, and they didn't do anything. So again, it was an example and a big issue with search and rescue teams. Unless you can get them in really, really fast, they're just to look good. When the American search and rescue team found a body, finally, that was someone who was injured, and managed to do it, I think it was day 7, maybe, there was this sigh of relief at the U.S. Embassy that, phew, we made it, we found one. It's a big political thing and a big show also for governments to say, look what we've sent. Big problem with Nepal is what they call Nepali flat, or the Nepalis call it ukalo oralo, up and down. That's what Nepal is mostly, mountains. And it's a big joke. They have a T-shirt called Nepali Flat. And villages are connected by roads that turn into paths that disappear into sort of like climbing up in certain areas. They are terraced. And what the earthquake did was it brought down whole sides of the mountains. So the villages just disappeared. If your house disappeared, some of the women I talked to were left sort of standing on just a little corner of land and had to climb on all fours to get to a flatter area. There was the issue of getting help, no phones, no connections, no ability to tell people they were alive or dead. The quake destroyed, as I mentioned before, 4,300 kilometers of roads. So how are you going to get aid? Here are some of the beautiful roads. You can see what it did. In terms of villages, in Langtang Valley, you may have heard of what happened into the Langtang Valley, which is about 80 kilometers north of Kathmandu, is that the quake triggered an avalanche of snow that turned into an avalanche of rocks and mud, and the shock wave flattened about 8 villages in the valley, and then the mud came down and buried it in such a way that it's like pure concrete, and you can't even get down to the villages anymore, to the leftovers. 240 dead just in those villages. So what do you do for aid? Well, you send in helicopters in mountain terrain. And all the big countries that had interest in the region, because Nepal is very much a listening post for many countries and sandwiched in between these two giants of India and China. These are the American ospreys. But first, I will talk a little bit more about the first ones on the ground of foreigners were the Indians. And the Indians got in within several hours, and they came in with C-130s and bigger planes. They were flying in within 4 hours. Luckily, what helped Nepal was that the airport was still functioning. In the catastrophic scenario, it wasn't going to be functioning at that point. How are you going to get in? How are you going to get out? Would have been a major crisis. But the Indians came in, and they came in with 13 helicopters. The Nepali military only had 9 helicopters, and a bunch of them that were in repair. So of the 9 helicopters, not much you can do with 9 helicopters, nor is there much that you can do with 13 helicopters. There was a disconnect because the Indian helicopters wanted to do their search and rescue on their own, didn't bring in the Nepalis, who knew where to go. There was also, they brought in a lot of media that was very insensitive with survivors, which started a hashtag that went viral in Nepal, which was #GoHomeIndianMedia. Then there was the Chinese sent in 3 Mi-17s, the big Soviet-style war horses, and but there were still, and then there were the American Ospreys, and they also brought in some Hueys, one of which crashed. The big problem with these mountains is you really have to have expertise to know how to fly and when to fly and where the winds are and where the trick places are, how quickly bad weather can move in. The Ospreys are very handy because they're half helicopter, half fixed wing in that sense. And in theory, they can carry a lot of food and tarps, in theory. But the big problem with the Ospreys is they can't go to high altitude. So forget about it, you know? Can't. So they could only bring the goods to a certain stage point from which they would get on trucks and move on. And the other problem is those rotors are major, major rotors. And so after they blew a bunch of roofs off of houses in landing areas, including the district commissioner's office, it was decided they weren't going to fly there anymore. And they couldn't go in and out that often and use as a staging point the Kathmandu airports because it was the backlog of planes wanting to come in and out was massive. So they would go and pick up their tarps on the Indian border and then fly to the one place where they weren't going to blow roofs off and deliver the aid there. And then the aid would have to wait for the local district, the government district officers, to get the trucks to take it into the mountains. And some of the aid stayed there for weeks and weeks and weeks. Some never moved at all, as a matter of fact. So the local resilience. There was huge amount of frustration that the government wasn't acting. The government was slow. The government, in certain levels, was inept. The government decided they were going to tax aid coming in. Yes, one. Oops, sorry. Hold on a second. I have to readjust. No. Yeah, now? Okay. So young people, Nepalis and Westerners, old people, mostly young though, decided to mobilize. This is probably the most famous. I'm going to talk about 3 separate instances here that I knew intimately and that I reported on. I did a story for NPR and some other people on this group in particular. This is Yellow House. It used to be a B&B, and they used to have an organic market on the weekends. But the young woman with the blue scarf, Nayantara Gurung, who is a very well-known Nepali photographer, she and a whole bunch of her friends decided, well, we got to do something. And the afternoon of the quake, since her father ran a bakery, they decided to take trucks of bread and go around and feed people with bread. And then they realized, well, that doesn't really get us very far, feeding people with bread. That doesn't work. So they created, it's very, very interesting. They were one of the first ones to do it. She used live data to map areas around Nepal that needed help. And it was all by word of mouth. And since cell phones are ubiquitous, and smartphones in particular in Nepal, she was able to, this is how they did it. They had word of mouth, phone calls in with all these various different young people, youth groups around the affected areas. The underlined places are villages off the main road that they accessed. They brought tarps and food, mostly rice, lentils, and tarps. And the other ones that aren't underlined when I was there doing these interviews are areas they still needed to reach urgently. The big problem with bringing aid in by these young people is that political cadres decided that, well, we want that aid. We want to show our people that they want to vote Nepali Congress, or they want to vote Maoist, or they want to vote United Marxist-Leninist, and there are lots of Maoists too. It's not just like one Maoist party. And so what they would do is they would, at various intersections, going into Sindupalchok, going into Gurkha, the cadres would stop all the coming trucks that were loaded down with all these various people. Trucks like these. This is the inside of Yellow House. And they would threaten to beat people up unless they handed everything over to the cadres, the political cadres, these youth groups. And the youth groups would then go and deliver, and sometimes not, maybe sometimes sell, and sometimes not, and say, vote Maoist, vote Nepali Congress, because we're the ones who are saving you and we're the ones who are helping you. It was a huge issue, so some of the people that were doing it were hiking, they were stopping, parking, before getting to the river crossings and this, that, and the other, where there were areas where they were being stopped, and hand carrying and shoulder carrying, hiking for hours and days to avoid the political cadres. The Yellow House was so successful that UNHCR, for the first time ever in Nepal, and probably in other places too, decided to forego bureaucracy and the rules of we must go through A, B, C, D, E, F, G before we can, leave a tarp. And they gave them to Yellow House to distribute. And Yellow House did this. Hold on. We'll get to that in a second. I will describe to you one of the UNHCR field officers went with the Yellow House up into eastern Sindupalchok to one of those villages that had been highlighted in pink. He took a 7-hour truck ride on a paved road, followed by 2 hours on a narrow dirt track over a precipice, because you can't be in Nepal and not be over a precipice, crawled on all fours over the landslide, hiked for 45 minutes uphill, and got to the village. This was 3.5 weeks after the earthquake. Got to the village and distributed the first tarps that got to that village. Here's another great story of resilience. It brings in UNDP. I went to UNDP had a program that brought in Nepali volunteer engineers, civil engineers, and they were starting out in Sindupalchok to help in an earthquake. First, you have to destroy. To rebuild, you have to destroy. So many of the houses were damaged, they had to be pulled down. And they were teaching local communities and providing hard hats and gloves and pickaxes and teaching them how to pull down destroyed buildings. Here they're destroying a school. Again, this is the great story how a neighborhood saved a heritage site. No one else was there to save it. This is Patan Darbar Square, one of the most beautiful World Heritage sites in Nepal, and there are many in the Kathmandu Valley. And whole sections of the temples had fallen down with very fine wooden carvings. When the earthquake happened, the community immediately blocked off all access to Patan Darbar Square, and with rope, whatever they had, and they set up their own guards. And then the army came and they said, okay, we're going to help you clean up. We're going to bulldoze. We're just going to go in there and bulldoze this stuff. You know, these artifacts, some of them were, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th century. We're just going to bulldoze it. And luckily, there was the chief conservationist there who happened to live in Patan, right near Darbar Square. And he came out and he had long discussions with the community that refused to let the army in. And they finally agreed with the army, and they put them all in a huge conga line. And they hand-moved all the artifacts to inside the museum, the Patan Museum, which is also part of the World Heritage Site. And they put them there like huge jigsaw puzzles they've been doing it now for 2 years, trying to put them together, because every window frame on the temples is unique. Not two were made the same way. So, and not a single one of them had a nail in them. So they were all put in almost like Rubik cubes. So that's what they're still doing right now, as a matter of fact, putting it together. I was one of those very frustrated people in terms of getting help out. One of the biggest problems was in the Kathmandu Valley, was the areas around the Kathmandu Valley on the edges of the mountains, because no one went up there. It's full of little villages, and they were on the direct area of the quake, and they were flattened, most of them. So I decided that instead of just reporting, I wanted to do something and help the people that I had lived with for the past 2 years at that point, 2.5 years. So I chose, a community that I knew, and I chose the town of my driver. He's a mugger, and he lives up in the highest village overlooking the valley. That is his house before the quake. The village is Kotdara. His house before the quake. His house after the quake. You can see that's my son over there. And I raised $35,000 on GoFundMe in the space of 10 days. That was pretty low for a GoFundMe, because there was a lot of GoFundMe going on, including one group that had raised $140,000 in the first 2 weeks and did extraordinary work. It was an easy way to avoid the tax that the government was imposing on everyone to come into the border, which was keeping stuff at the airport for weeks on end and not releasing them. This is what Kotdara looked like. There was total transparency. We told the villagers created their own reconstruction committee. We brought them information on how to rebuild earthquake-resilient homes. They made lists. They identified every person that lived in every house, graded the level of damage to every house. I have piles and piles of paperwork. I put up a Facebook page for Kotdara. My donors received weekly updates on exactly what was done and what was spent with the $35,000. As you can see, my son is counting out the money for corrugated iron sheeting. They did all the buying. They kept all the receipts. We didn't get involved in that. We didn't want the government to start saying it's Westerners doing this. We had weekly meetings on Saturday. It took forever to get the corrugated iron sheets because there was a shortage, of course. This is the first shipment of corrugated iron sheets that came up there, and we had a big distribution. Again, everything was documented for the donors. that were every single friend I could possibly convince to give money. And they got a lot of emails with a lot of pictures saying, look at the destruction. Now, the thing with Nepal is that everything is reused, everything. So this is the village down from where I lived, in Kokana, and that woman over there is going through every brick to see every brick that can be reused to build her house. This was an interesting one. It involved the UN. I have to hurry up. This is an evacuation of young monks that was coordinated between the World Food Program, UNICEF, UN OCHA, the Ministry of Child Protection, and the police. And it was the first official airlift of unaccompanied minors across district lines. These are the young monks. My earthquake diary. This is the number of earthquakes in 2 days, and the Richter scale. Everyone should have quake feed. And this is so to finish off, all I can tell you is, especially if you live in Istanbul, is prepare, because it's going to happen. When people say that it's time, when seismologists say that it's time for having a major earthquake, that the crust is at breaking point in terms of pressure, it's going to happen. And Istanbul is a major place. So prepare. All of Turkey, if you look at history of Turkey, is about earthquakes. And don't say that it's just karma, because you not only can save yourself, but you can help your entire community if you are prepared. Thank you very much.
Thank you for those words of encouragement. Thank you. Thank you very much. All right, let's bring in the second half of the Partners for Pratibha. Thank you very much for allowing Donatello to squeeze in. The stage is yours.
And it's my great pleasure to invite Isra Bhutanri, the head of Environment Cooperation Unit of OSCE, Mehmet Uwais, Senior Inclusion Specialist, EBRD from Turkey, Emily Wilkinson, Senior Research Fellow, ODI, and Kemal Taylan, Youth Skills Officer, Save the Children, based in Turkey. So in the panel A, we heard how UN agencies were approaching risk and resiliency in their programming and response, and especially from the perspective of how we have an integrated approach so that we can look at both prevention, preparedness, and response as in a continuum. And now we will hear from our other partners, both multilaterals and NGOs, on the same theme. So we have 45 minutes, I'm told, for this session. So I hope you can keep it to 5 to 8 minutes of your intervention so that we have some time for the audience to also interact with you. So with that, let me invite Isra Bhutanri, the head of Environment Cooperation of OSCE.
Thank you very much. And I would like to thank our UNDP colleagues, our hosts, for inviting us to this very interesting event since yesterday. Of course, risk reduction and strengthening resilience are the cornerstones of our work within the OSCE, especially in the environmental field. Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe is first and foremost a security organization. But with its comprehensive approach to security, which includes hard security issues, as well as economic and environmental issues, which I'm representing, and human rights issues, it is well suited to address various aspects of the 2030 agenda in an integrated manner, especially because the agenda as such has centered peace as an important element. I will
specifically talk about the environmental aspects of our security. Within the OSCE, in addressing environment challenges, we focus on the two-way relationship between environment and security. One, environmental degradation as a source of conflicts and tensions, and environmental cooperation as the means to achieve security and stability. And almost all our portfolio activities are based on this two-way relationship. In doing so, we focus mainly on 4 thematic areas, which we consider as having strong security implications, and these are transboundary water cooperation, disaster risk reduction, climate change, and hazardous waste management. And cross-cutting these 4 areas, of course, environmental good governance and strengthening civil society. Most of our work is based on participatory vulnerability assessments and joint programming, and almost all our activities are, of course, transboundary in nature. We work very closely with our target beneficiary governments. It is almost the entire program is highly demand-driven, and it very much relies on partnerships. And UNDP is one of our long-standing partners, not because I worked for UNDP many years and many of the colleagues in this room, I had very close working relationship, but OSCE as such has an institutional agreement and institutional structure to cooperate with UNDP and with many other UN agencies. I will go briefly through the thematic areas, just to give you some maybe concrete examples, as was requested in the morning as well. Water cooperation, where we collaborate very closely with UNECE in almost all target beneficiary regions that we are working with. One of them is the Dniester River Basin. Since 2004, together with UNECE, OSCE has facilitated discussions between governments of Moldova and Ukraine. And after 8 years of intensive work, they were able to agree on a treaty, Dniester Treaty, for the management of the Dniester River. And in 2015, this collaboration led to a transboundary adaptation strategy for climate change for the Dniester River Basin, which is one of the few examples in our region. And now, this year, we are collaborating with our UNDP colleagues on a new partnership building on this cooperation to work within the framework of a GEF project. And other examples, one I could give from South Caucasus, where we work together with our counterparts in Azerbaijan and Georgia for a similar bilateral water agreement for the Kura River Basin. We have so far facilitated 6 bilateral consultations, and we are approaching to the finalization of the agreement hopefully soon. And of course, in Central Asia, our long-standing engagement together with our field colleagues on Chutalas and establishment of the Chutalas River Basin Commission. And there are several other examples, but I will just limit this to these 3 concrete ones. And disaster risk reduction is the second thematic area. Well, OSCE has been dealing with disasters for many years now, but actually it was mainly during the Swiss OSCE chairmanship back in 2014, where we had almost 1 year of discussion in the OSCE platform, be it among the policymakers or between the NGOs and academia, on the linkages between disasters and security. And this 2014, as we call, forum process has also led to a ministerial council decision where the ministers of foreign affairs from 57 OSCE participating states agreed on a ministerial council decision on enhancing disaster risk reduction in the OSCE region, which identified the concrete linkages between disasters and security, and how OSCE, both through its participating states and also through its executive structures, could support this. Well, in general, in the disaster risk reduction topic, we follow a 2-track approach. One, the community-based disaster risk reduction reduction, where we again work very closely with our UNDP counterparts, both in the regional program in Istanbul, but also in the field of country offices, and also our support towards national policy making and transboundary cooperation. One of such examples is our long-standing engagement in South Caucasus on wildfire management, which was initiated as a result of the wildfires that occurred in Nagorno-Karabakh line of contact back in 2006. And since then, we have been actively engaged in this region, and one of the last examples we have is the development of fire danger rating system, which is an early warning tool for wildfire management, especially in case of Armenia and Georgia, and we hope to expand it to the whole region. And this, in a way, good example in South Caucasus has been replicated in Mongolia as well during 2014-2015. And now we are working on a similar capacity building program for wildfire management in the Chernobyl exclusion zone. The other aspect from community-based disaster risk reduction, we are working in several municipalities in southeastern Europe, and also now in Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan on local disaster risk reduction planning through participatory approaches, especially with those municipalities which are in the bordering regions, such as between Albania and Montenegro, Serbia and Bosnia-Herzegovina, and in case of Central Asia, between Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan. Well, climate change is the third area that I would like to briefly touch upon. As we have heard in the keynote speech in the morning, I will not elaborate on the linkages between climate change and security, but the OSCE engagement has been in a way initiated following the UN Security Council discussions back in 2007 and 2011. And since then, OSCE has been actively engaged, and currently, together with our several UN partners, we have been working in 3 regions, South Caucasus, Eastern Europe, and Central Asia, on identifying security implications of climate change through participatory assessment processes and also geographical hotspots. And actually, next week, one of the last steps of this project will be in Central Asia, to be organized by our UNDP colleagues, to do a public outreach activity to disseminate the results. And same we will be organizing in Caucasus and Eastern Europe. And of course, as mentioned yesterday several times by our distinguished speakers, President Otunbayeva as well as Sonia Licht, about community engagement and the importance of civil society engagement. We have done, I think, from the OSCE side, we have come a long way in this process, especially by putting in action in concrete terms the Aarhus Convention on access to information, public participation, and environmental decision-making and access to justice, through a set of Aarhus centers that have been established in many countries. Currently, we have a network of 60 Aarhus centers working in 14 countries. And we have been collaborating with our UNDP colleagues and several UN partners in this. And very briefly, I will touch upon the women and youth engagement. Yesterday's focus on role of women is also very much in line with our work. For instance, in Central Asia, we have organized trainings for female water professionals on career enhancement in water sector, as well as in the area of conflict prevention, how we could engage more women in decision-making power in the conflict prevention processes. And most of this work, I will conclude, is done within the framework under the umbrella of an initiative which is called Environment and Security Initiative, a partnership which was established back in 2003 among initially OSCE, UNDP, and UNEP. Later on, UNECE and Regional Environmental Center has also joined our partnership. And within the last 14 years, we have implemented a number of projects jointly. And I think, again, referring to this morning's keynote speech, this MSEC initiative remains to be one of the unique partnerships that addresses these issues in an integrated manner, building on the strengths and expertise of a number of organizations. With this, I would like to conclude. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Really, OSCE plays a very important role on cross-border, building cross-border relationship, but also in building community-based resiliency. And we really appreciate our partnership with OSCE. Let me now move to EBRD and really once again request all the panelists to stick to 5 to 8 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning to all delegates. I also like to thank our UNDP colleagues for inviting EBRD excuse me, to this important dialogue program. I will focus my remarks on three topics that are most relevant for this team. The first one is the EBRD's recently updated transition concept. So, starting from 2017, the EBRD has introduced a new way of measuring the transition to the market economy. So, for those who are not familiar with the EBRD activities, this is the main concept that underpins the design, implementation, and evaluation of its investments and technical cooperation projects. So, this is our mandate. So, according to our new concept, a well-functioning market economy has to have some qualities. So we have identified 6 qualities for a well-functioning market economy. These are competitive, inclusive, green, well-governed, integrated, and resilient. So what it means for us? For us, all EBRD investments must meet at least one of these qualities. So we bring the resilience into the qualities and the transition impact of the EBRD investments. And for purpose of the transition concept, a resilient market economy means the one that supports growth while avoiding excessive volatility and economic reversals. It is also about the ability of markets and market supporting institutions to resist shocks. Also, it's about the policy predictability. And it's the balance and the sustainability in financial and economic structure. In order to monitor these components, we have identified 3 main areas. The first one is the financial stability. As we are a private sector-driven multilateral development bank, we focus on the private banks. So for the banking sector, financial stability means for us is the well-capitalized, profitable, and effectively supervised banking sector. The second area is the food security. For us, the criteria are the productive agribusiness, agriculture, which is resilient to the external shocks as well as the climate change. The third criteria is the energy sector resilience. So we give importance to response to the sudden changes, also appropriate energy market and the regulatory framework. And finally, the diversity in supply or the export markets. Let me finish the transition concept with a recent example. How EBRD supports the resilience for the private sector. As of this week in Turkey, we have provided a loan to the largest non-performing loan and asset management company in Turkey. And this investment will facilitate the new lending within the economy and help financially challenging companies to become active again. So this is a very recent loan we have financed in Turkey. On my second topic, I would like to mention also our partnership from UNDP institutions in Turkey and the EBRD's refugee response program in its country of operations. EBRD has decided to initiate the refugee response program in its country of operations, mainly now in Turkey and in Jordan, I believe soon in Lebanon, and the program started in 2016. And we mainly target the host communities and refugees alike. There are three urgent priorities we have identified. The first one is the infrastructure development, and we are supporting the central and local government institutions to ease the strain on the public services, such as water, sanitation, solid waste, and transportation. The second focus area, and which is also in line with our private sector mandate, is the small and medium-sized enterprise growth program. So there are two subcomponents under this program. Especially in Turkey, we are working to improve the access to finance of these refugee-driven companies, which are emerging in a quite number of ways. And we are also supporting them with the know-how for small businesses in underserved regions. So we have a specifically designated team in Turkey and in Jordan that supports these small and medium-sized enterprises, especially in the most affected regions. The third pillar is the economic inclusion pillar. So it's the economic inclusion of the refugees in Turkey, or in another legal term, the Syrians under temporary protection. So EBRD is working with its private sector clients, government institutions, and other stakeholders such as Chamber of Commerce and Industries to increase the quality of local training based on the employer's skills requirements. And I'm also very pleased to say that we are working closely with UNDP, Ankara and Gaziantep teams, and I see some of my colleagues in the room from UNDP, and we are trying to complement each other's activity in this skills requirement and skills verification issues. So the final topic will be about, rather an update about our work in EBRD. We have recently announced the draft economic inclusion strategy of the EBRD. So you can check our website and see leave a comment till the 14th of April. So in EBRD, so far we have focused on three target groups, which were previously underserved social groups. These are women, young labor market entrants, and the population in less developed regions. So in addition to these groups we have focused traditionally, we are also focusing on the refugees in the upcoming strategy period. So I would like to thank to all the delegates and leave the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So let's move from resilient market infrastructure and efforts to include women, youth, and other marginalized group to now ODI, to Emily Wilkinson. As we all know, ODI is a premier research institution and has done incredible work in coming up with conflict prevention analysis methodologies, but is also now working to see how to promote a more integrated approach, focusing on root causes and emergency response. Emily.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I suppose just a bit of background to ODI as a development think tank, and a lot of the work we do is it's relevant, policy-oriented research, but also convening stakeholders, holding public events, providing policy advice, and doing public affairs work. So we try and sort of cover a range of different topics related to risk and resilience, but many other development-related themes as well, to engage with various stakeholders, including obviously lots of UN agencies in our work. I wanted to talk about 4 areas of our research on risk and resilience, which we're expanding on, which are part of our new strategy, and which I think speak very much to a lot of the issues that have come up yesterday and today. The first, and that hopefully will be interesting to you, the first is around translating sort of difficult technical hazards, climate science, a lot of the sort of scientific work that's going on that should be informing development in high-risk places, but is often very inaccessible to policymakers and practitioners. So a lot of the work we do is sort of in translation of that very difficult sort of technical concepts, and bringing it to policy arenas, bringing it to public attention. And one of the projects which I think is most interesting in that area is around communicating attribution science. So there's this enormous amount of work going on at the moment to look at extreme events linked to natural hazards, to climate-related hazards, and to explain to what extent those are due to climate change. And so there's a whole sort of industry of scientists working on this now, and it's getting very good and very refined, so we can actually look back on particular disasters and say, we know that part of that event, X% of that event, is attributable to climate change. So we're very interested in making sure that that science is well known. We're working with media organisations to communicate that better, so that following an event, people can understand a bit more what was the relationship with climate change there. So that's one area of our work which I think is useful for those working in this area who want to sort of raise the profile of climate change and its links to the extreme events that we're seeing more and more of. A second area of work is very much working in partnership with governments to explore solutions to what seem like intractable problems of risk and development, places where risk and geography seem to be conditioning, holding back development, and that it's very difficult to overcome those kind of geographical determinants, if you like. And Nepal and the geography of Nepal and the not just earthquake risk, but landslide risk and flood risk and drought risk would seem to be is one country that is sort of exemplifies that. So as I said, we're working with governments in many of these sort of geographical risk hotspots to try and understand if there are sort of levers or entry points to bring about changes. And so, for example, we're working with a number of countries in small island developing states to look at the historical drivers of exposure to the small-scale hazards and the sort of larger, rarer, more extreme events, and seeing if particularly when there is a disaster, is that a point at which we can begin to address some of the land use and access issues that determine why people are located in extremely high-risk places, and those are linked to historical patterns of land use. Another project in semi-arid areas, in places that are particularly drought-prone, marginalised. We're doing research to look and see if we can identify and promote sort of unlock economic value in pastoralist activities, for example, in semi-arid areas. So livelihoods that have been marginalised in the past may prove to be great solutions in places that are prone to drought and increasingly seeing effects of climate change. So that's another important area of our work. A third, and one which is, I think, very relevant to the kind of relationship that we have with UN agencies, is around supporting and encouraging reflection, learning and adaptation in practice. So working with implementing agencies on resilience and disaster risk management programs to help bring knowledge to the implementation work, to bring in knowledge from other countries, other places that might help support that, to do monitoring of the work. And I think one of the most important aspects of this sort of knowledge management, knowledge exchange work is to bring different implementing partners together to exchange experiences, so that they're not just sort of in the field getting on with implementation, but are able to actually step back and see maybe what's working elsewhere. And we're doing that on a large DFID-funded resilience program called BRACE. And there, one of the interesting pieces of work is actually looking at the use of emergency funding, an emergency funding window that is available to NGOs, to see to what extent that can help them to continue delivering their resilience building activities even through crisis, the fact that they have access to this funding window. And finally, a fourth area that we're interested in and very much related to implementing these global agreements around resilience and disaster risk management is around promoting greater accountability. We think that this is an opportunity now in the sort of post-2015 era to actually do better political economy analysis of disaster risk management policies to understand better what's working, what's actually reducing risk. And the countries are developing sets of indicators and targets at the moment and thinking about nationally what they want to achieve. And this is a really good opportunity to sort of promote transparency and accountability for actions to manage risk. And one of the pieces of work that we're doing around sort of incentivizing investment in disaster risk management is a project called the Triple Dividend of Resilience. We're actually looking to measure the benefits of investing in risk management that go beyond just the avoided losses when there's a disaster, because we know that that's not a great incentive for lots of governments, that they won't necessarily be in office when the next big disaster occurs, so they won't be able to claim the credit for having invested in risk management. That's also quite difficult to measure. So are there additional benefits? Does investing in risk management, providing a safe environment in which businesses can operate, does that generate other development or resilience dividends, and can we measure that? So that's a very interesting project that we're working on that's growing. And I think I'll leave it there just to say that, we're very interested on my third point on sort of doing more knowledge management, knowledge exchange. We're very interested in working with the UN system, UN agencies on that, and hopefully through the 5, 10, 50 program on risk-informed development, which was mentioned yesterday, I think, we'd be very interested in supporting that and making sure that there can be sort of flexibility and adaptiveness as risk management programs are being implemented so that they really achieve the best results. Thank you.
And let me now invite the last speaker, Mr. Kemal Taylan. He's a Youth Skills Officer in Save the Children in Turkey.
Yes, thank you. Actually, I had a presentation. If you could just put it in this again. And can I have the clicker, please? So let me begin. Save the Children is an international NGO that was founded in 1919 in the aftermath of the World War I. And today we are active in 120 countries. Our operations in Turkey actually cover both the Syrian crisis in Turkey, and also we have cross-border operations in Syria. In Turkey, we are present. Our operations are active since 2015 in cities of Hatay, Şanlıurfa, and we have a presence in Istanbul. Our Turkey program focuses on child protection and education. Our cross-border operations in Syria is active since 2013, and it focuses on health education, food security and livelihood, water, sanitation and hygiene, child protection, shelter and nutrition. Our mission is to inspire breakthroughs in the way that the world treats children and achieve a lasting change in their lives. So let's go over the context of the Syrian crisis a little bit. Turkey hosts 2.9 million, actually over 2.9 million registered Syrian refugees. This number is as of March 16th from the General Directorate of Migration Management. And actually 60% of this population is under the age of 25. So we have a really huge population that's young. And 830,000 of them are between the ages of 6 and 17. And as you can see, there's a great demand for education. Minister of Education of Turkey actually does a lot to face this challenge. In temporary education centers, there are 300,000 Syrian children accessing education, and another 200,000 is in the Turkish public schools, making up to 500,000. But still there is room for more education. And when you look at these Syrian children, it's mostly the ages of 10 to 17 that doesn't attend schools. And according to our experiences, we face three key challenges to to their accession to schooling. First is an inability to re-engage in the education system after a long time of not going to school. So this is, for example, imagine you are just 17 years old, Syrian young man, and you didn't attend to school for 4 years, so you have to start over again with 13 years old, and this is causing an embarrassment. Also, there are cases of psychological problems that individuals might have. Another reason is a reluctance to enroll in the schools, in the education centers. What does it mean? Well, it means, for example, if you want to go to a Turkish school, you need to speak Turkish at a proficient level. So actually, language is a barrier. Also, there might be ethno-religious barriers. And third, the unstable financial situation of the families affect the children's attendance to schools. Boys, especially after the age of 15, 16, become breadwinners. We systematically saw very little attendance from these age groups of males to schooling. Also, females, there's the early marriage is a problem for the females. Families just let or encourage their girls, their daughters to marry at an early age to stem off some of the financial burden from their households. So what does Save the Children do to face these challenges? We support 58 education centers in Hatay district, that's the province in the border of Syria. We support these 58 education centers with education kits, teachers' education tools, hygiene sets, and handicraft sets. So far, we have reached about 16,000 children. We provide transportation service to schools for about 2,000 children. And in 2017, we will start our conditional cash program to the families of 590 children who are out of the school. We are constructing 3 schools in Hatay in districts of Kumlu, Arsus, and Erzin, and we will hand them over in September 2017 to the Directorate of National Education. And we are planning to reach 1,530 children by these schools. We are constructing football fields. We have constructed and rehabilitated football fields in 2 districts of Hatay. And Adolescent-Friendly Centers is a project that we, sorry about the, I think, yeah, some of the text just moved, but the Adolescent-Friendly Centers are basically spaces where children can attend non-formal education. We have built 2 of these centers in Iskenderun and Antakya, so they are also in Hatay district. Our target group is Syrian and Turkish youth aged 10 to 25. And the services that we will provide is language courses, catch-up courses, skills training, and psychosocial support. Social cohesion is embedded in all parts of our programs, and our centers are also accessible to disabled children. So let me go over our programs real fast. Our language course consists of Turkish courses for Syrians, English courses for both Syrians and local community, Arabic courses if demanded by the Turkish public, and I should also say that all of our courses are in collaboration with the public education centers. Our catch-up classes are maths, science, and Arabic classes. We will also provide assistance to Syrian children on their enrollment to the Turkish public education. And we have 2 main goals here with our catch-up classes. First is to provide the youth who have been away from the school accession to education, and second, to help them return to formal education. Skills training is also an important part of our program. We help adolescents to be better equipped for the labor market. We will be providing job search and CV preparation skills, entrepreneurship skills for those who want to be self-employed, as well as vocational trainings in courses that in areas like computer maintenance or mobile maintenance that they can find work in the local market. We will have psychosocial support sessions. These sessions will target traumatized children. There will be one-on-one counseling, and there will be group psychosocial activities using our own developed programs such as HEART, which stands for Healing Through Arts, and also Youth Resilience Program. So especially adolescents or children at this age group are better to express themselves through art rather than through speaking. So this is an important part of our program. Social cohesion is also embedded in all our activities. We don't want the host communities to be feeling resentful against the Syrian refugees. So the host community can always benefit from our services. And we want to achieve social cohesion through recreational activities and language classes. This is a picture of our adolescent-friendly center in Iskenderun. So child protection is in every part of our work. We provide support from our specialists to those young who need it. We encourage awareness activities led by children themselves on their rights, and we implement recreational activities and free transportation to schooling. We have case management program which focuses on special needs of individuals. We are working here with governmental organizations like Social Assistance and Solidarity Foundation and Directorate of Family and Social Policies. So we assess needs and supply items such as wheelchair, hearing devices, food and non-food supplies, and psychological sessions. So let me just also summarize our work of the Syria program. Actually, the number here is 900,000, but yesterday we worked in Syria through partners, and our partners updated their numbers. So the updated numbers are that we have reached so far 1,500,055 adults and children, and 1,074,000 of them are children. Our services in Syria include education, health, nutrition, food supply, and livelihood programs. So that's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So you have heard from a very diverse panel here on how they are incorporating risk and resiliency in their programs and the support they are providing. I will open the floor for any remarks, question answers, and if there are any other partners in the audience who would like to share how they are focusing on risk and resiliency, and so you are most welcome to share your perspectives as well. Brian.
Hello. There we are. Question for Save the Children. Was intrigued by your decision in 2017 to do a conditional cash transfer program. I'm wondering if you can say a little bit more about why you decided to do that and how it will work and the extent to which you're working with government or not. Thank you.
So basically, most of the boys after the age of 14, 15 become breadwinners. We wanted to encourage the families to send their children back to school, and we wanted to compensate for the financial burden that this will cause to the households. did I answer your question? Yeah, we haven't started the program yet, but we have, what we do is basically we make house visits. We have an outreach team and we make house visits. And when we identify cases, we just take them down, and we will be doing this in cooperation with the Minister of Education.
Questions, we have actually come to the end of the session. Thank you very much, first of all, for sticking to your time. But also, I think this is just the beginning of conversation. And I hope you'll continue over lunch and coffee break, because there is really a lot more that we can get into understanding better. For example, the inclusive and resilient markets, resilient financing, resilient infrastructure development is a very, very interesting theme. But also looking at environment, climate change, and focusing on service delivery in emergency situations. So with that, let me thank the panelists for really excellent presentations and sharing your perspective on programming from risk-informed perspective. And also let me thank the panel A members for participating today. And so with that, we'll wrap up the session.
Yeah.
Okay, everyone. You may remember a famous play that then became a movie called You Can't Take It With You. But in this case, actually, when it pertains to coffee, I think you can take it with you. And in fact, we're going to ask you to take it with you. That is to say, we'd like to shorten the coffee break, essentially cancel it because we're running a bit behind schedule. We'd like to ask you, therefore, to take the coffee with you to the corner sessions that we will now move to directly. And as you can see, once again, here are the locations for the corners, showing once again the slide we had earlier. So the governance, migration, and conflict corner will stay here. For socioeconomic risks and resilience and climate and disaster risk, that will be upstairs. So please do take a cup of coffee with you. It's outside. Grab a quick bite of food if you need something to really encourage you to stimulate you for the contribution to the corners. And then let me make one more observation. I would like to remind us of what Pedro Conceicao said about not getting trapped in silos. And even when we're in our corners, thinking about the links between our corners and the other corners, because this will be especially important after lunch, because we'll go from the corners to lunch, and then after lunch, we'll be having the, following the session on Syrians and Turkey, we'll be having the reporting back from the corners as well. So there will be a rapporteur for each corner who will be presenting, and then we'll have discussion on those presentations. But I would urge the rapporteurs not only to describe narrowly what was discussed in the corner, but also to be able to present more broadly on how what your corner talked about might relink to the other corners in order to have the right alignment and linkages to the different types of risks and resilience challenges that we're facing. So to recap, please take a cup of coffee with you to the corners. Either you'll be staying here or you'll be going upstairs. From there, we go to lunch, and we'll be coming back here to reconvene at about 2 o'clock. Thank you very much.
And just a logistical sort of insider. If you are in one of the groups upstairs, you don't have to carry your coffee upstairs. There is coffee and tea available upstairs as well.